2021 marked the 30th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's kind of a given at this point that Sega likes to celebrate these milestones, usually in the form of a major anniversary title. Sonic's 30th was different though, and was honestly kind of a slow year for the Hedgehog. Only 2 titles were released this year, only one of which could be played by the general public, and neither were necessarily new games. The first was Sega Streaming Theater Sonic Edition, which was a very unique game, distributed only to Japanese VTubers to play during live streams, and never saw public release due to its very specific requirements in order to even function. That being said, the elements that made up the game consisted primarily of mechanics that mirrored the original 16-bit Sonic the Hedgehog. The other game was a remake of the 2010 title Sonic Colors, dubbed Sonic Colors Ultimate, so overall, no new adventures, with the next mainline title, Sonic Frontiers, releasing in November of the following year. There was one event, however, that was cause for celebration. On the anniversary date of Sonic's 30th, June 23, 2021, we received a livestream titled Sonic the Hedgehog 30th Anniversary Symphony, a musical concert produced by Sega in collaboration with Boston-based music producer Soundtrack, Tokyo-based live music company Soho Live, and performed by the Philharmonic Orchestra Prague. It served as a wonderful celebration of Sonic's musical history. When it comes to what we like in Sonic games, us fans typically can't seem to find a middle ground, but the franchise's music is somehow the one thing that we all seem to agree on. As such, the concert was a resounding success, and though not every song from the series' history could be included, it served as a reminder to a lot of us of just how far Sonic has come along since his debut, and us along with him.
On May 20th, 2023, it was announced that Sega and Soundtrack had partnered with entertainment touring company MGP Live to bring this concert to people around the globe, thus creating the Sonic Symphony World Tour.
MGP Live is a company we started almost 4 years ago in like pop music and symphonic jazz, experience like most of the concept of special events.
Now, obviously I thought this was amazing, but sort of left it at that. I didn't initially bother to check dates or locations because I didn't think I'd be able to attend anyway. No matter where the venue, it's probably a pipe dream, too expensive, too soon to properly plan, etc. Then, in early August, as I open Instagram, I see a post from the official Sonic account, dates and locations for upcoming shows. I figure, you know what? I'm curious, what places around the world are they going to be performing at? And one specific location catches my eye. Washington, D.C. That's not unreasonable for me to visit, and the concert wouldn't be for a few more months, not until the new year. Was I going to... You know what? I barely treat myself, I'm gonna get a couple of seats. And so, that was that. I was going to be a regular attendee and enjoy the show like everyone else. The following month, in September, I attended Cleveland Gaming Classic, a retro gaming convention in Cleveland, Ohio, as a special guest, alongside some of my friends from Minus World, a collective of content creators that get together and collaborate from time to time. During my visit, I was surprised to see and meet Jack Botnick, a short-form content creator that I'd known for a while for his excellent Eggman cosplays. We talked for a little bit, he seemed very nice, and about a month later I saw a post of his at the rehearsal for the show in Chicago, as well as cross-promotion posts with MGP Live. And I have no idea what compelled me, but I thought to myself, you know, I do Sonic stuff, I'd love to work with the company that's putting on this show. I'm gonna reach out. I don't do that. I usually wait for people to come to me because I hate being a nuisance and inconveniencing people, but I guess I was just feeling businessy that day.
So I reached out and they were totally cool with me coming over to watch the rehearsal and make some content for social media that would eventually become, well, the video you're watching right now.
The day was finally here, and together with one of my best friends, Nathaniel Bandy, we set out to make it to the rehearsal.
We're currently on our way to
Sonic.
See you soon.
Sonic.
See you soon, Sonic. We're currently on our way to the Symphony. We left a little earlier than probably most people left because we were heading to the backstage for the rehearsal. We're gonna break into. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun though. We should be there soon. It dawned on me when we were talking about it that we're actually gonna watch the thing twice because we're gonna watch the rehearsal. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
We arrived in DC a little earlier than the start of rehearsal, so we had a bit of time to kill. We decided to grab a bite to eat since we had a pretty busy day ahead. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little worried that this whole thing wouldn't end up happening because we got major snow just a few days before, but fortunately the roads were clear enough for us to get there safely, and the reason I bring up the snow is so that I can illustrate just how freezing the temperature was on the streets of DC that day. You see, after our lunch, we made our way back to the Warner Theater, the venue where the concert took place, and though the entrance to the theater was clear enough, we weren't exactly sure where the backstage entrance was. Nathan and I were just left to hope we would either run into someone or that someone would come find us. Fortunately, it seemed like we weren't the only ones who were a bit lost. While walking around the venue, I saw a woman carrying a violin case and thought maybe she might know something, but figured I was just being presumptuous. Someone carrying an instrument doesn't immediately mean they're part of the orchestra, you know? It's a big city, they could just be a random violinist. That was until she came back around to the front entrance, noticed we had our camera equipment, and asked if we were looking for the backstage entrance too. We were lucky enough that other musicians were making their way to rehearsal as well, so we ended up following them, and they led us to where we were heading. Inside, literally everyone we talked to was incredibly nice and welcoming. You would expect people to be super strict and reserved when it comes to a big production like this, but everyone knew that we were there to do something alongside them.
I've had a relationship with the Sega guys since 2016, I think 2016, 2017. One of the guys from Sega America, he's now the chief brand officer, Evo. He's an amazing guy. Yeah. I got to know him through a friend, a common friend. And he said, in San Diego Comic Con, we have a big panel room, I want to do something music. And he's like, he's a hardcore 80s music fan, and so like he knows Motley Crue and all those like big, crazy bands. But he's like, can you do something? I said, yes. So then like I quickly asked my guys, and hey, can we just like do this project? And just we brought the band there and rehearsed a bunch of times. And did the show with Jun Sanoa. He happened to be there. That was the first time for me to meet him. It worked out. So we continued the relationship with Evo and everybody from Sega. We did a show in Japan. It was like a VGO show. So we played a bunch of other games, and Sonic was one of them. China Joy is the biggest video game convention in the world, and we were asked to play a show, and they were like, Sonic. I'm like, great, okay, so we did Sonic. Yeah, that was like one of the craziest gigs we've ever done. And so, you know, like there have been instances like where we kind of worked on Sonic's concert stuff. Then the 30th came. Evo basically said, like, leave it to Shota, like he's gonna do it, he can do it. So, yeah, I'm like, sure, I will do it. And I guess like my team and I like made things all happen, and it was a very intense gig, and especially because it was during the COVID time, and we all had to stay home to work on the stuff, like in a very isolated environment. Yeah. But yeah, it just worked out, and the online concert was received super well, and we said, like, you know what, when this is all over, we'll get to the road.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it felt surreal to be here and see the performers move on and off stage, get ready coming out of their dressing rooms, and my favorite part was hearing some of the musicians practice certain parts before the rehearsal while others were getting ready. It was a fascinating hodgepodge of different tunes I recognized. An oboist practicing Marble Zone's music, while a violinist would practice a very specific part of Sonic 1's boss theme over and over to get it just right. I really wish I would have recorded that, but I didn't want to do so without proper permission from the staff, and we hadn't met up with my contact yet when this was happening. When we did though, they basically told us what the timeline was looking like, but that in the meantime we could take a seat wherever we'd like to witness the rehearsal. We pretty much sat down in the middle rows of the bottom floor, somewhere we could get the best shot of the stage. We weren't allowed to use our higher quality equipment here, but it was still okay to record with our phones. Entering the actual theater was amazing. The Warner Theater's neo-Renaissance design was just delightful to be within and admire.
Interestingly enough, we found out that this was the venue's 100th anniversary.
This place, originally known as the NYA'LL, has been host to many notable performances over the years, not just musical ones, but vaudeville acts, stage plays, stand-up comedy routines, to even just serving as a regular movie theater from its inception. Now, a bit of context. This show had been sold out for months.
So the show is tonight, January 20th, and we sold out in September. In London and LA, we sold out the tickets in hours. There's a great response from the audience.
We were curious as to why exactly they chose the Warner Theater for the concert. Even as someone who's never been to an event like this, I could tell the venue was a bit on the smaller side, especially when the first two concerts of the tour were held at the Barbican Hall in London and the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles. The Warner Theater sits up to 1,847 people, which, don't get me wrong, is still a lot of people, but my initial impression was due to me not having seen the upper levels at the time, so I didn't know there were more seats above and behind where we were sitting. The Dolby Theater, by comparison, seats 3,332 people. Not quite double, but way more than the amount here. Originally, I thought Barbican Hall had around the same capacity as the Dolby Theater of 3,300, but that's because I was also taking into account the Barbican Theater and the Pit, two separate performance halls that are part of the larger Barbican Center. Barbican Hall, however, is where orchestral performances specifically take place, and itself only has a capacity of 1,943, so about 100 more people than where we were at. The reason the symphony was taking place here was because, much like the other venues that they've played, MGP Live, the touring company presenting the show, has historically had partnerships with these performance halls for previous shows. I know it's obvious that they most likely bring these shows to these venues out of contractual obligation, but the way the event coordinator explained it made it seem like the company genuinely liked working with the people in charge of this particular location.
So we started with major markets like LA and London. In fact, we premiered in London, and the most prestigious venue was Barbican. Then in LA, because Hollywood, Dolby Theaters, the venue where they have the Oscar. The choice is like the most prestigious venue in each market.
It's weird to say because I know it has nothing to do with the concert, but considering that my mind was already thinking about how I was going to make this video, I couldn't help but wonder how all these things work behind the scenes, the business aspect of putting a show like this together.
So this is literally all thanks to Katie Krzyzanowski, the social media manager for Sonic. She came to me right before the 30th anniversary, because the first symphony was a live stream. It was not originally supposed to be a live stream. It was supposed to be a tour like how it is now, but because of the pandemic, they decided to change gears for it to be a live stream. And so she needed somebody essentially who is a Sonic fan that will understand what goes where, what level needs to be playing during that moment, and an editor, someone that can edit. And I think also at that time I was already a moderator for their live streams, so I just assumed because of that they probably just thought I was probably the safest bet. They don't really need to try somebody that they have not engaged with yet on an official capacity. So I believe that's honestly just kind of how it happened. I just fit the bill.
And like clockwork, when the time finally came, conductor Jose Delgado came on stage and got ready to start the rehearsal. And you'd think they just play, right? I mean, there's no one here yet, just make sure all the musicians are ready and start. But the thing is, this is still a performance, one that you're putting on for a couple thousand people. Like any production, you need to make sure everything is working before the actual show. I noticed that each musician, conductor included, had a sort of earbud that they would adjust during this time, and I wondered what that could be for. Because it was connected to a sort of box that went into the conductor's back pocket, I assumed it was a type of lavalier microphone, those little clip-on mics that you'll see people use in interviews and whatnot, also commonly known as a lav mic. I figured it was a way for the conductor to communicate with the instrumentalists and for them to hear him over all the loudness of the music. It turns out I was only half right. Those earpieces are known as in-ear monitors, or IEMs for short. What they allow musicians to do is hear their instrument more clearly when compared to the rest on stage, and for the conductor, he can hear the band the way he wants to. Certain sections could be pronounced, he could focus on one side of the stage in particular, and overall it would allow him to hear the band the way we in the audience would. The thing is, the stage is a really loud place, and I don't doubt that it ends up hard to hear what it all sounds like when you're having hundreds of instruments blasted right in your face. That being said, it doesn't really come down to the conductor, but the audio engineer, who was sitting behind where we were. The conductor would sometimes ask him to raise certain levels or tell him that certain sections were too loud, and beside the audio engineer was a lighting technician in charge of making sure that the stage was properly lit. And that's something else I never would have considered. Obviously, every venue they play is different, and as such, there's no one setting that universally works. They have to play around with the lighting for each stage, and each venue has a different size and shape, meaning that the way that the sound waves move around is going to affect the final mix that the conductor hears in their IEM, meaning that that needs to be adjusted accordingly. But as they started playing, it was incredible. It's weird. You would think that every bit of nostalgia would take over in that moment. Like, it would be overwhelming to the point that it would be distracting to a fan like me. But I don't know if it's because I knew I had to be observant or because I was trying to take it all in. I was more mesmerized than moved, you know? It's hard to explain. Every time they'd finish a section, I felt so compelled to clap, but I knew that it would just be so inappropriate given this is just a rehearsal. There were only a handful of times that they would have to repeat a section, and honestly, the only reason they would do so was to tidy up the timing. I can't help but compare my experience to the original 30th Anniversary Symphony. Not in terms of quality, because both are excellent, but in terms of the sets played. It had been a while since I'd last listened to the 30th Anniversary Symphony, so I went back to make note of all the differences between it and the concert I experienced. Much like the original symphony, the World Tour separated into two, technically three sections. Act 1, where they play arrangements of the classic games with a few Dreamcast and modern era tunes thrown in. Act 2, which is a full-blown rock concert featuring guest vocalists. And the Encore, which still technically belongs to Act 2, but is usually considered its own section, so I'm choosing to consider it separately as well. Obviously, they start off with a medley of the original 16-bit Sonic the Hedgehog. Something you'd expect is that because it's a medley, they don't go in level order, but what I thought was interesting was that it's a very different medley from the one we see in the original game's credits. In fact, you want to know the coolest thing about the Sonic 1 medley? It's the only time in the entire concert that a medley features every piece of music from its respective game. Title Screen, Green Hill, Starlight, Marble, Labyrinth, Scrap Brain, Special Zone, Boss Fight, Final Zone, Spring Yard, and ending with the title screen reprise from the original game.
It was the Christian Wyatt port, but if I try to remember correctly, it was my sister's Mac, because I don't have like Mac stuff. And the game gets a little weird. I don't know if you've tried this, but when you have like any display, it'll stretch to that display. I think I just used a Mac and then I connected it to a monitor to capture. Though it's hard to remember because the 30th, I was just going super quick. I'm just happy there's an official release though too, where I can do it on console now. Because I'm like, I don't want to hunt out a Mac again.
Next on the list was a Sonic CD medley, and I'm not gonna lie, I remember this being in the original 30th Anniversary Symphony, and it's not. They go straight to Sonic 2, so this medley is kind of new. In it, we get arrangements from the Japanese version of the Sonic CD soundtrack, mixing bits and pieces of the present, past, and good future versions of the levels into the arrangement, which is a super cool way of going about it instead of just using one over the other. The only songs featured are You Can Do Anything, the main theme of the game, Palm Tree Panic, Collision Chaos, and Stardust Speedway, which is the only level to feature a Bad Future arrangement because, come on. In fact, the Bad Future part of the medley was one of the only parts they ended up re-rehearsing because the conductor thought some of the musicians' timing was off, and it was kinda cool to see him basically hum the correct timing to them. A bit of a side note, but during the rehearsal, and frustratingly enough, even during the actual concert, I didn't record much of the Act 1 performances because I wasn't really thinking about it too much and was just enjoying myself. And not to mention, I wasn't clear yet on exactly how much I could record of the rehearsal, but I wanted to send my parents a clip from the Sonic 2 medley, the first game I'd ever played, and one they'd be most familiar with. At this time, they had to continuously pause the accompanying video that plays while the orchestra does, and so they hadn't played anything for the Sonic 2 portion, until they started playing Emerald Hill Zone's theme, at which point someone must have accidentally clicked the wrong thing or something, because the opening cutscene for Shadow the Hedgehog started playing, which was pretty funny. As for the actual Sonic 2 medley itself, it's fantastic. I'm a little, or I don't know, a lot biased, but I wish they'd included Aquatic Ruin and the boss theme for the medley instead of Wing Fortress Zone, but I get why they did it the way they did. The Chemical Plant and Casino Night arrangements are awesome though.
So this is a fun one. This is essentially what they told me. This is the music, play the level of that song. That's literally all they told me. And at first, I kind of did that. I was like, I just turned on Green Hill and I was just going. It just felt a little boring. And the funny part about this is, and I will happily say this out loud because it's just funny, is at first they did supply me with the videos. They weren't telling me I needed to capture. They were going to give me the capture stuff. They were just going to have me edit. The problem with that is not all of them are hardcore Sonic fans like us. So when they got to example Labyrinth Zone, they were getting hit every 5 seconds. I'm like, how can I use this footage? And that's when I decided I am just going to capture it myself. And I found it to be better. And then regarding the timing of things specifically, that was thanks to Justin. At first, I was timing it too much with the music. I was doing hard cuts and it would be pretty jarring. And it was thanks to him saying, maybe if you do a cut where Sonic is still going in the same direction so it's not so jarring. And when he told me that and I started playing with it, that's when the transitions, I was like, oh, I could do some cool transitions with this stuff. The jokes, that's where it started, was Labyrinth Zone was the first one, with that where it zooms in and then does the game over. That was their gameplay. And I jokingly sent that. I jokingly did that. And I sent it off to them like as a work in progress. At first, she was a little hesitant. Katie's like, I don't know. Like, I feel like we should probably show these levels in the best light. But this made me laugh. and she's like, you know what? Keep it in. And then after that, I was just like, my brain went wild. I'm like, oh my God, Chemical Plant. We got to drown. Casino Night. Tails needs to gamble. We just need to go crazy.
I know this isn't the biggest loss in the world, but the Sonic Game Gear medley is omitted entirely in the World Tour concert. Or rather, it was in the concert we attended. While researching for this video, I came across the Sonic fan wiki page for the World Tour and figured it would provide insight as to its inception and whatnot, but it turns out that it also has a pretty comprehensive list of what sections were played in which concert, which is super interesting. Granted, most of the World Tour has been pretty consistent at each location, but there are some notable differences. For example, the only location they did play the Game Gear medley at was at the World Tour's very first stop, at their concert in London. And though I get why they did it for the sake of time constraints, it is kind of a shame that this part of Sonic's musical history just kinda got pushed to the side. I will say it's in favor of better, more iconic music, but it's a shame nonetheless.
So it was really just us just like messing around. The biggest one that, in terms of jokes that I'm surprised they did is at the end of the 8-bit one where Tails dies at the end. It has Tails in the sky. I jokingly did that where I'm like, oh, in the end, Tails dies. Katie's like, do it. I'm like, okay. And we did it. And it got in. So it was just, we were just, after Labyrinth Zone, it was just like, okay, we can make this entertaining. It doesn't need to be boring. We can make people have fun and let fans have references that they'll get and they'll be able to point at the screen and laugh at. And it was really just a process to get to there, but I'm happy we stuck with it. And they allowed us to do that. And I feel like that's what makes Sega cool. They're like, hey, we can have fun sometimes. Yeah.
The 30th anniversary had a Sonic 3 and Knuckles medley, which included the Sonic and Knuckles title theme, Angel Island. They show Mushroom Hill as a sort of interlude, but I'm unclear if the music that plays here is still a transition from Angel Island because I can't tell what part of Mushroom Hill this is supposed to be, leading into Sky Sanctuary. In the World Tour, however, they reduced it to a sort of Sky Sanctuary medley, starting with an arrangement of the original 16-bit song, which then transitions into an interlude with the graphics showing part of the Sonic Frontiers Prologue Divergence animation, which then leads into an arrangement based on the modern version from Sonic Generations. It's so strange how much they like to focus on Sky Sanctuary compared to any other locations from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I'm sure part of it is because of the legality and licensing of certain tracks, but all the songs performed in the original symphony were all tracks composed internally at Sega. I don't know, I just like to see more than Sky Sanctuary be acknowledged, you know? After this, we have a Sonic Mania medley, which is phenomenal. I will say that I feel so bad for Mirage Saloon Zone because not only is it not a zone I see many people talk about outside of its boss fight, but because neither of its acts are featured in this medley. And I get it, I'm not the biggest Mirage Saloon fan myself, but it really stands out when it's the only original zone from the game to not be featured in the concert. And though I'm also not the biggest Titanic Monarch fan, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think the orchestral arrangement was amazing. It feels like what a climactic final area should feel like.
Yeah, it's always really, really awesome to see people performing all the scores we prepare, all the stuff, because this kind of production takes I don't know how many hours we put in. It takes a long time. It's like making a movie. It's an intense production. Seeing that coming to life is quite, I don't know how to describe it. It's it's surreal. Yeah.
This one's kind of a shame. The 30th Anniversary Symphony had a Sonic Saturn medley, which is really frustrating because there was a lot of good music during that era that I wish Nathan and I could have experienced live. Much like the Game Gear medley, I get why it was cut, but even the original set was a little confusing, to say the least. It contained Can You Feel the Sunshine from Sonic R, the Gallery theme from Sonic Jam, which is a remix of the file select menu from Sonic 3, so it's technically not even from this game, and then the Nights theme from Nights into Dreams. And I think it's awesome that they decided to pay homage to the very first time Sonic was ever playable in 3D space, but it's not a Sonic song. Not to mention, and I don't know why this is, but 3D Blast isn't featured in this concert at all, and this would have been a perfect opportunity to include it. Next in the concert is a very interesting section. I don't even really know how someone would refer to something like this. I guess it's a medley? It just feels weird to call it that, considering that it only features 2 songs. So it starts off with the original version of Believe in Myself from Sonic Adventure, transitioning into the version from Adventure 2 halfway in, followed by a kind of bridge that leads into an arrangement of just the Adventure 1 version of It Doesn't Matter. You see what I mean? It's hard to describe. It sounds great though. Bit of a shame that the Adventure 2 version of It Doesn't Matter isn't featured since that's my preferred one, but I do acknowledge that the Adventure 1 version fits the arrangement so much more because it makes the song feel so much grander.
But also Katie was also having fun with it too because the whole Burger Man getting thrown in the water, that was her. I didn't do that. That was Katie's idea.
The 30th anniversary had a Sonic 06 medley right after this, featuring what I think is the opening cutscene, Crisis City, Elise's theme, and topping it off with Solaris Phase 2. Again, I get why it was cut, probably for time, but I would have loved to hear Elise's theme in Solaris Phase 2 live. Instead, the World Tour replaces it with a Chow medley, and this one is really interesting. The original 30th anniversary concert technically had this too as the intermission music, separating acts 1 and 2. The thing is, the original was only about a minute-long loop that played for 10 minutes, and the closer we got to Act 2, the more instrumentation was added to that loop. The World Tour version not only adds instrumentation from the get-go, but it adds sections for the Chow Race, Chow Kindergarten, and a small little nod to the Chow Karate. Overall, an improvement on the original and very much appreciated as part of the concert. Much like Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where there was originally an entire medley for Sonic Unleashed in the original 30th Anniversary Symphony, they reduced it to only a Rooftop Run medley for the World Tour, and this one really bums me out because this soundtrack was made for an orchestra to play. But the more I think about it, maybe that's the reason why. If you listen to the 30th anniversary, it sounds almost identical to the game, not much new to it. And even during the concert proper, Jose Delgado, the conductor, announces this and the next 2 songs as new arrangements, which I'm guessing just means that they're distinct from the 30th anniversary version. But still, to see the World Adventure theme, Spagonia, Shamar, Arid Sands, Dragon Road, and the orchestral version of Endless Possibility live would have been incredible. I will say that they do something I think is pretty cool, which is much like Sky Sanctuary, they incorporate an arrangement from the original composition in addition to 2 other versions, both remixes from Sonic Generations. It's kind of brilliant because all 3 can be strewn together to form one song with different sections. The classic remix plays with the original song's tempo to create a different feel altogether, whereas the modern one feels like a more amplified version of the original, both coming together to make the song feel a lot more festive. This is perhaps where the 2 concerts deviate the most. Remember at the beginning when I introduced the 30th Anniversary Symphony that I mentioned that only 2 Sonic games had come out this year? Well, the concert also kind of offhandedly served to promote Sonic Colors Ultimate, evidenced by a couple of things. For starters, the Sonic Colors medley doesn't happen until the end of Act 1 in the 30th Anniversary concert, which is very noticeable considering that both a Lost World medley and a Forces medley play before it. But also because the opening of Act 1 was a back-to-back performance of the Recolors version of Reach for the Stars, Colors' main theme, and its end credits theme, Speak With Your Heart. In the World Tour, Colors is back where it belongs chronologically, and much like Believe in Myself and It Doesn't Matter, it doesn't quite fit the mold of a medley per se, since they only perform arrangements of Aquarium Park and Planet Wisp. Originally, the only 2 levels they didn't play the music for were Asteroid Coaster and Terminal Velocity, and yeah, it was pretty great. This new version has an intro sequence for Aquarium Park that's incredibly serene and calming before jumping right into the action and picking up the pace, followed by a pretty brilliant transition into Planet Wisp. This is where I think the visuals really help sell the experience too. Just by listening to the music, you could probably tell where one part ends and the other begins. It feels a lot more seamless when you have visuals to aid that transition. And then they bring it back to Aquarium Park to tie the whole thing together, and it's just lovely. So you'll recall that I just said that the 30th anniversary had medleys for both Lost World and Forces before the Colors medley, and they're gone. Both of them are absent from the World Tour, and once again, it is a shame because say what you will about them as games, but the music Tomoya Otani made for them translates very well to an orchestra. It's a testament to just how great of a composer he is. And here's the thing too, both medleys are pretty short, only featuring a couple of songs each. Lost World featured Wonderworld, the game's main theme, Windy Hill, which is melodically very similar to Wonderworld, ending with Sea Bottom Segway, the theme played during the rail grinding levels where you're in a tube surrounded by water. The Forces one doesn't even contain a level theme. It starts out with Fist Bump and ends in Infinite's theme, which, man, the arrangement of Infinite is so good. Instead, the World Tour features a medley for Sonic Frontiers, starting with an instrumental version of I'm Here, the game's main theme, which is nothing short of breathtaking. I wish I could say it's recency bias, but then I realized the game came out well over a year ago. I genuinely just love this song's melody, and it sounds incredible when orchestrated. It's followed by the theme of Starfall Island, which is so funny to me because I never realized that both those songs, as well as the Kronos Island theme, all start with the same piano progression. That is then followed up by Flowing, the song that plays during Cyberspace's 1-2 stage, one of, if not my favorite Cyberspace tracks. Then they bring it back by performing a reprise of I'm Here, which sounds gorgeous, made better by the visuals that accompany it. Now, like I said, the 30th anniversary had its intermission after the Sonic Colors medley, and the World Tour has its intermission here. And from what I remember, it wasn't a very long one since they had to make use of most of the time they had before the event. Something I was excited to find out about days leading up to the actual concert was that a certain vocalist by the name of Casey Lee Williams was not just a guest star during their, at the time, most recent concert in San Francisco, but that she would also be the guest vocalist for the concert I was attending too. I've been listening to Casey's work since her days on Ruby, so knowing she would be performing Sonic vocal tracks was like 2 different eras of my life coming together in the strangest but coolest of ways.
We've known Casey since she was like 10. Her father, I took his class in Berkeley.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's how I knew her. We had to get a different singer for certain shows, and we were like, how about Casey? Like, everybody kind of had her name in their head, but nobody said it. Well, because Sonic songs are like very like male songs, and a lot of us didn't really like think of female singers singing the songs. But then we're like, oh, you know what? Let's just see what happens. Yeah, why not? And she happened to be a really great singer, and she nails it. So
the concert changes gears near the end and a half, and we wanted to represent that in the visuals as well. And also, I think all of us kind of dove into our like old Sonic AMV hearts, like those videos we watched on YouTube, and I was like, I have to be the first person to officially make a Sonic AMV.
While Jose Delgado is still on stage to perform his duties as conductor, Act 2 is what they consider a rock concert, and so the artists playing the necessary instruments to properly qualify it as a rock concert come out. That includes Casey taking center stage, Derek Dupuy on keyboard, Luis Andre Ochoa on bass, Blaze Collard on drums, and the man responsible for so many of the arrangements we heard throughout the concert, the co-producer of the World Tour and guitarist for Act 2, Shota Nakama.
I was like a middle school dropout in Japan, right? And so back in the 90s, I guess, if you are a high school or middle school dropout even in Japan back then, it's like it's like sin. And also my dad is a doctor. People told me like you're gonna just fail. Your life is going to be miserable. Like literally, like people like my teachers, like they would just like just tell my face. That's what I said to my mother, and I was like 13. I said like, it's not your life, it's my life. I decide, and it's pretty shocking, right? I didn't really do anything because like there was nothing to do. It's a small island, and then also I didn't have a car, obviously, so I just walked around and I was hanging out with college kids and stuff. I was aimless, I guess. But then one day I saw this band playing music from Deep Purple. So then I was like, this is it. And my uncle, my mother's younger brother, used to play in a band. So he's like, yeah, I got some guitars, so I'll give you one. So he sent me one, and when I held the guitar, I was like, this is it. And I was always into the Western music, like British rock, American rock, and all that stuff. So I thought the real music is in America. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to America, yes. I don't know how, but yes, I'm gonna go anyway. When I turned 18, this friend of mine who knew somebody in Seattle, he's like, hey, do you wanna go to America? And I'm like, yes, heck yeah. I was like, let's go. And when? And he's like, in 5 days. I'm like, okay, let's go. So I met my band and they say like, hey, goodbye, I'm quitting. And back then I had a girlfriend too. I said like, goodbye, not coming back. So thank you so much, bye. And so I left. I literally left, and then I knew it was the right place for me, and I never turned back.
Act 2 is definitely where you can see more inconsistencies when it comes to the tour set list. I'll go down the list as they played it at our venue, but I'll make note of any songs that they performed elsewhere too. So you'll remember that I mentioned that the intro to Shadow the Hedgehog started playing during the rehearsal of the Sonic 2 medley, and that's because they usually open with that game's main theme, I Am All of Me. For the most part, the performance is really faithful to the original, but every now and then you get those little reminders that there's still an orchestra playing alongside the rock band. You can hear the strings, which complement each song beautifully in my opinion. Casey makes this song her own. Even though her voice doesn't match the energy of Crush 40's vocalist Johnny Gioeli, that doesn't mean she doesn't do a stellar job at performing their songs at a similar level. Her voice is powerful and she has an excellent mastery over it. When I was a kid, I loved Adventure 2's main theme. I mean, who didn't? But another of my favorites was What I'm Made Of, the final boss theme from Sonic Heroes, and it was weirdly missing from the 30th anniversary concert, and I kind of get it, because they play the game's main theme instead. For the world tour, it's the other way around. A quick side note that I think is really funny, I always struggle to remember the order of the lyrics that come after the first chorus. Like a million faces, I recognize them all, and one by one they all become a number as they fall. I can never remember if that part or the black mark on the floor part comes first, and during the rehearsal, Casey had the same problem because she repeated the black mark on the floor part twice. And that's something I love about seeing these artists perform during rehearsal, is that human element. We all make mistakes, and we all love to goof off. When the rock band came on stage, they sort of lazily practiced what they were going to say at the actual concert. And when I say lazily, I don't mean that as an insult. There's practically no one in the theater. They don't need to put anywhere close to 100% of their energy into a part of the concert they're most likely going to improvise anyway. Not to mention that they're just getting a sense of what they might say during the actual concert. Someone I noticed liked goofing off the most was the bassist Luis Ochoa, and you can tell that he and Shota are close. A song that is definitely elevated by the use of an orchestra is Open Your Heart, Sonic Adventure 1's main theme. Since the electric guitar is a bit more subdued in this song, it really lets the backing strings breathe and allows them to really shine throughout the song. Open Your Heart is followed by Night of the Wind, the main theme from Sonic and the Black Knight. I don't know if I even have anything else I can say about this one. It sounds awesome. Maybe it's just me, but this one seemed like the one where the musicians were at their most playful. From Casey's vocalizing to Jose's foot tapping to even Shota's guitar solo, they all seemed like they weren't trying to play the song in a methodical way, but just what felt right to them, and you can't argue with the results. After that, Casey left the stage, which I was confused by. Were those the only songs she was going to sing? It turns out that the next song they were performing was His World, the main theme from Sonic 06, and this one is sung by Luis Ochoa and Derek Dupuis. His World was added to the World Tour to represent 06, which is great, especially considering that the 06 medley was cut. During the actual concert, Luis even shouted out Tomoya Otani, the song's composer and sound director for the series ever since this very game. During rehearsal, something weird was going on though. You see, Derek, Luis, and Shota all serve as background vocalists in addition to the instruments they play, and as such need to have their gain reduced to not overpower Casey's main vocals. But now, since Derek was going to be performing part of the main vocals, they needed to increase the volume at which we'd hear him, and they either couldn't or wouldn't, because I could barely hear his parts during the song. The reason I'm assuming something was going on was because I could see one of the technicians walking across the stage to where I'm guessing a lot of the sound equipment they were plugged into was. It would be fixed in time for the actual concert, but he stayed pretty quiet during rehearsals, so I have no idea if something was really up or not. At the end of the day, it still sounded fantastic.
Now that I do Sonic Symphony, my favorites are kind of different, and I think I like his world a lot. Yeah, and also like I think I did a pretty good job with the score arranging. Yes. And it's super epic, and it's a fun song to perform, actually. And when you listen to it the first time, it's like, catchy song, great. But then like when you perform it, you are immersed in the song, and you feel very differently about the song. I think there are hidden His World fans, because whenever we play, like everybody just screams the lunch time. Yeah.
Casey came back on stage to perform the next song, Sonic Forces' Fist Bump. During the actual concert, she mentioned that this was her favorite of the songs on the setlist to perform, which I thought was pretty interesting. Fist Bump is new to the World Tour as well, since, as you'll recall, it was one of the 2 songs from the Forces medley in the 30th anniversary set. Much like Land of the Wind, nothing much to say, sounds amazing. Though, you might notice a certain OC in the concert graphics.
I know the 30th had like a couple shots where it was like my OC, but the tour I was like, no, that needs to all be Ian Jr. And I added way more Ian Jr. and did cutscenes with Ian Jr. Ian Muchler, obviously, that's all him. I know for the tour, and if I'm trying to remember correctly, I believe he was surprised with how much Ian Jr. was in there. He didn't expect that, but yeah, no, it was. I would give it out to him. That was all him.
The next song on the list is Reach for the Stars, originally the opening to Act 2 in the 30th anniversary. I'm curious how others feel about it, but I personally love that they've kind of adopted the Recolors version of the song as the de facto version. While I've always loved the original, the Recolors version just feels a little bit more Sonic, if that makes sense. Anyway, I think the song in particular is super interesting because I feel like due to how its original vocals are mixed, it's hard to really replicate the feel of it live. Not only are John Paul McLough's vocals soft, I believe they also apply a technique known as layering, where you essentially sing the same notes and layer both tracks on top of each other to create a sort of fuller feeling to softer sounding vocals, if that makes any sense. I've watched other concerts of this tour, ones where the guest vocalist is Adrian Cohen, singer for the band Seven Spires, and I noticed a similarity to the way she and Casey performed the song in particular. They sound a lot better when the audience is singing along. Naturally, they both have very powerful voices, which is what has made every song they've performed so far sound amazing, but for Reach for the Stars, when it's just them, they sound like they have to restrain themselves because the vocals don't require that much energy. But when that energy is shared with thousands of people serving as your background vocalist, that same intensity doesn't seem so out of place. It's something I wasn't really thinking about at the time, just more so in retrospect, and it's so cool to observe how performances are also subject to their environment.
If you see the project, you realize that there is a huge potential because it's a great opportunity to combine like symphonic with other genres of music, even with hip hop or rock or metal, which is amazing. Yeah.
Endless Possibilities sounded incredible. The combination of the orchestra with the electric instruments gives it a much more important feel. Casey's vocals for this song had a very particular vibe for me, reminding me of another talented vocalist I love with the last name Williams. Jarrett Reddick's vocals are typically also very soft, but Endless Possibility doesn't utilize layering as far as I know, which makes Casey's more powerful vocals sound just as grand. I couldn't tell you why, but this one also had my favorite performance from the backing vocalist. They just mix very well together during this song. I want to mention a lot of the set changes now, just because most of the rest of the songs in Act 2 came out in between the 30th Anniversary Symphony and the World Tour. Originally, the 30th Anniversary included the main theme from the latest game at the time, Team Sonic Racing's Greenlight Ride. And now that I think about it, you could definitely argue that it's a spin-off, but isn't it kind of strange how that game was given the main series title treatment? A tie-in animation, the long-awaited return of Crush 40, being represented in the Symphony. Regardless, Greenlight Ride was dropped for the World Tour, as was the Crush 40 version of Sonic CD's Sonic Boom. And you'd think that maybe they'd at least bring that last one back for the concerts where Crush 40 were guests, but nope, they just performed their own songs that are in the rest of the set.
American Crush 40.
Yeah. Yes, that's fantastic.
That's my favorite too.
There is one other major difference that I want to mention really quick, and it's that exclusive, and I don't know why this is, but exclusive to the shows in Boston and Chicago, they played a Ghost Pumpkin Soup, the level theme for Sonic Adventure 2's Pumpkin Hill. And I'm jealous, but also why? Not just why play the song, it's a great song, but why only in Boston and Chicago?
Sega gives us an input as well, and my team, there's my production engineer guy, he's a die-hard Sonic fan, like
Nice.
incredibly like knowledgeable, and so yeah, he comes up with like the ideas, and then we take those ideas and make some medleys, and sometimes we ask the fans to decide what songs we should be playing. Like I just want to like hear from more fans, and it's just like I don't want to do the traditional producer style thing, so like you just do stuff and you don't listen to anybody, and then like you're kind of siloed.
The next song that's been added to the World Tour is the opening theme to Sonic Superstars, the latest game in the series at the time of me making this video. And this is where I unfortunately feel like I have to be a little hurtfully honest. So neither Nathan nor I were expecting this song to be played. Hell, I don't think we expected anything from Superstars to be in the concert at this point, and the reason for it is because it is a little out of place. Think about it, right? Even Mania, being a classic-style game in the modern era, was arranged for an orchestra and was, as such, part of Act 1. And I understand that the main theme was composed with electric guitars and such, and so it technically fits the mold to be part of Act 2. But another reason it feels out of place is because it's a song with no vocals. In fact, it's the only song in Act 2 with this distinction. And it's not like Frontiers didn't have music that was arranged for Act 1, so I don't think it's a matter of recency. So remember how I said Crush 40 were special guests at certain shows? Well, Jun Tsunoe co-composed the Superstars opening, so naturally he's going to perform it, which is why I think it's part of Act 2. And don't get me wrong, I like the Superstars theme, and Jun kills it with his performance. He even adds a little bit of It Doesn't Matter during the Los Angeles show, and it sounds really fitting, like a bridge between the classic and adventure era, the way that Superstars is meant to be. But sonically, it's just that it feels weird that it's here of all parts of the show. There's a little reprieve where only the orchestra plays, and I think it's the perfect example of what I mean. It sounds lovely as just an orchestral piece. The only reason I bring this up is because it was the one time during the actual concert that I could hear how fewer people were excited about this one. And I feel like that wasn't unique to our concert. When I'd look up other ones, it was pretty consistent that the reaction to Superstars' intro wasn't met with that much enthusiasm. And I feel bad saying that, mostly because I feel like it's a situation where hands are a little tied. It is the most recent Sonic game, and like it or not, it needs some representation. I personally just think it would have fared better as part of Act 1. So after Endless Possibility, Casey had to leave the rehearsal because she had a previous engagement, meaning that the rest of the vocals wouldn't be performed during practice, but the music still was. And man, what a time to do so, because the next vocal song they rehearsed was Break Through It All, the Wyvern Titan theme from Sonic Frontiers. I suspect that this might be one of Lewis's favorite songs of the set to perform because he just gets so into it. The arrangement for it with the orchestra is just absolutely amazing too. Kellen Quinn, the vocalist for the band Sleeping with Sirens, as well as Frontiers' Titan themes, was also a guest at the Los Angeles show, alongside Otani, and man, it's always so cool when the original artist can join in too. I should mention, just because there's really no other good place to do so, that David Vibes was the main guest vocalist at the Los Angeles show, and much like Adrian Cohen, David is a frequent collaborator of Shota's. He's performed a bunch of times with VGO at other events, and he kills it. All of these vocalists have put in the work for the shows they've been a part of.
If you work with the same person always, then there's that, like the camaraderie gets stronger and the friendship becomes tighter. But being able to work with like all these like different talents, because everybody's different, right? It's not about like who's better than the others. They bring unique color to the group, sort of like injects like more like emotions to the group and like kind of revitalize our mind. It's nice to be able to work with like all these guys, and they seem to all love working with us too. So
That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
After that, we have another Titan theme, this time Giganto's Undefeatable. And man, by itself, without the lyrics, the accompanying orchestra almost makes it sound like a horror movie score. One thing about this part of the concert I noticed the most was the video made for it. This and Break Through It All have animated music videos, not just gameplay like the other songs, which are super helpful for people like me that weren't sure about what certain lyrics were and still wanted to sing along. I mention it now because the one for Undefeatable more than the Break Through It All one felt a lot more stylized and eye-catching to me. Visually, it really fits the song, like that's what my brain thinks the song looks like, if that makes sense.
A London show, which was the first show, it wasn't all animated. It was mainly the gameplay, and I would only put Break Through It All on text when they would say Break Through It All, or very specific parts of the lyric. I would have it pop up on screen. And that was just me doing my regular thing. And it wasn't until we got confirmation that Kellen was going to be at the LA show, and I was going to the LA show, and I'm like, this doesn't do them justice. I have to make this better. And they allowed me to. They allowed me to update it. And you'll see that difference between the London show and the LA show, where I have it all animated. And the same with Undefeatable. I did the gameplay for that, but the lyrics were done by Dan for Undefeatable. And yeah, we just want to make it the best that it could be, because God, this is going to be behind Kellen. Like, this is not, like, this is a big deal. So, yeah, we wanted to make it the best it could be for that reason.
The other two Titan themes, Find Your Flame and the reprise of I'm Here, known as the revisited version, were featured in concerts after the one I attended, and though I can't speak to how they're performed, I'm sure they're just as damn good.
We did Find Your Flame. I did the gameplay for that and the sequences for that, and Dan did the lyrics for Find Your Flame. I did all of I'm Here Revisited, gameplay and lyrics for that. I guess the funny part is, and Dan's gonna kill me, but there was a typo actually in Find Your Flame. Now, to be fair to him, I didn't catch it, he didn't catch it, and no one at Sega caught it. It just flukely under the radar, but that's something that obviously that's going to be updated for the next show.
Something the original 30th anniversary concert did was sort of fool the audience into thinking that that was it. Show's over, everyone can click on something else, or in our case, go home. Well, this is the part of the concert known as the encore. Usually, an encore is something that is demanded by the audience, which I'm positive was true in the original concert, given that there are two little unknown songs that, I don't know, I forget the name of them, they're from Adventure 2 though, that they hadn't played yet. Obviously though, in this case, and I'm sure this is commonplace, it was a planned encore. Now, obviously for the rehearsal, they weren't even going to pretend that this was the end of the show, but during the actual concert, the rock band, along with Casey and the conductor Jose, walk off stage, leaving only members of the orchestra. But then Jose comes back, making us think that maybe they're all coming back on stage for a final bow or something, but then he starts conducting an intro sequence, one that is arranged specifically for the symphonies. And what plays on screen is the opening to the hero side story of Sonic Adventure 2, which leads us into Escape from the City, and it is such a cool way to listen to this song. Like, these last two songs are ones that I genuinely feel have a different vibe to them due to the orchestral arrangements, and not one that makes them unrecognizable from the originals, but like I said earlier, just makes them feel more significant. And I mean, they are. They're songs that are beloved by pretty much the entire community. Other than that, I struggle to verbalize anything new about these songs. Everything I've said about the previous ones apply here. Something I thought was interesting was that even though this is exactly how the 30th anniversary symphony ended, there were other shows on this tour that had much different encores. Some of them don't even play Escape from the City during the encore, but rather as a regular part of Act 2. Some shows had a 3-song encore, some shows had 4. The only constant is that the final song they play in every single concert is Live and Learn. This might be admittedly a little hyperbolic, and I'm sure there are people who are going to disagree, but if there was ever an end to the Sonic series, this is the version of the song I want playing during the final boss. It manages to somehow perfectly blend the rock elements of the original song with the grand elements of the orchestra to create a version of the song that is larger than life. Shota knew how important this song was for the series, and he delivered an unbelievable arrangement.
We want to be proved by the audience, which is the most important thing, right? To be proved that the show works. When we did when we saw the reaction in London at the premiere at Barbican or in LA, that was my understanding, to have more shows and more dates, and of course the musician, the band was, Shota was happy to do as many shows as possible.
Hopefully we can continue doing this, and then I can make people happier even, and if I can increase the amount of happiness in people, and that's yeah.
The only other difference I can point out between the two concerts is that the credits in the 30th anniversary consisted of an orchestral version of the song Friends from Sonic Mania, which I believe is absent from the world tour. And just like that, the rehearsal was over. We went backstage as we were told to do in between the rehearsal and the concert proper so we could interview Shota and Massimo, the very interviews you've been seeing throughout this video, though we weren't exactly sure what the schedule was looking like. We sort of just stood around the area hoping my contact would answer my message, but as I said to capture some of the backstage, just in case, Shota walked up to us and told us he was pretty much ready. My contact had given him the rundown beforehand, and we'd met up briefly before the rehearsal just to say hi. What a down-to-earth dude. It honestly was just like sitting down and talking to someone who has the same interests as you, because he does. I think the most important part of it all, and the reason Shota is so successful at what he does, isn't just because he's talented, it's because he gets it. He gets what it is people like about this music. He understands the passion that video game fanatics can have. He understands from a technical and artistic level how to make music evoke the right emotions. And not just that, but he takes a personal interest in it too, I think. You know what he pulled out and wore right before the interview? A King Ice Shadow the Hedgehog necklace. As far as I know, he was not wearing that during the rehearsal. He might have been, and I just couldn't see it because his shirt was more buttoned up, but why would you wear one on stage during rehearsal and the concert and not show it off? It's possible he put it on for the interview, and honestly I'd find that even funnier, but no matter how you cut it, that's dedication, dude. After that, we went in and interviewed Massimo Garotta, the CEO of MGP Live, the touring company responsible for producing the world tour. Now, I'm sure you can hear it, but as soon as we entered Mr. Galota's room, we could hear music playing from the speakers. Throughout this video, you've also been seeing my interview with him, so you can sort of get an idea of the kind of man Mr. Galota is. And knowing that he's an Italian man that's the head of a musical group that's been producing musical concerts since the 70s, what would you guess is the music playing through those speakers? You're wrong, it's Sonic the Hedgehog soundtracks.
I was under the impression that we could have done something great. When I listened to the music and we went over the music with that for the first time that we spoke with Sega, I saw the potential and I saw rock was there. And when I learned about Shota, about the production and the music, the arrangement, I said, that's a great combination. Yeah,
I kid you not, when Nathan and I walked in that room, Massimo was listening to Metallic Madness Zone from Sonic Mania, and the only reason I remember that is because it was so bizarre to me that this man could be listening to anything. This man knows music, but he is also so supportive of the shows he puts on that he'll just listen to Sonic music while chilling out in his room.
I like that you guys have just the music playing in here. That's really nice.
Yeah, I can recognize all of the different songs.
After our interview with Massimo, it was about time for the show to begin, so we went ahead and found our seats, which were much further away than the seats we chose during rehearsal, and honestly, it's kind of a good thing. After the rehearsal, my ears were kind of ringing a little bit, so I knew that the music had been a little bit too loud for my old man ears where we were seated. Not to mention, I'd had my fun, you know? I just saw this show without the thousands of people screaming all around me. And then, I had a very different experience. I was about to watch this concert with other Sonic fans. People in cosplay, people who bring their plushies, kids who are here with their parents, people who don't do things like this for a living. For me, my concert was the rehearsal. And now, I got to experience all these people who get to enjoy their concert. People singing along, people visibly trying to restrain themselves from the excitement of seeing one of their favorite songs being performed by an orchestra, experiencing their interest be legitimized. I described the entirety of the rehearsal to you because, honestly, it wasn't much different from the actual concert. Obviously, there were some pretty key differences, but overall, the musical experience for me was the same. I think that I got something different when it came to the environment, though. The people in front of me checking their social media and seeing a timeline full of Sonic fan art, the couple behind me, the guy obviously a Sonic fan, and the girl just there to share in one of her loved one's interests, the people a few rows down that Nathan says opened their phones and were looking at my Twitter profile, that was a surreal one, the people all coming from wildly different backgrounds, uniting in one place and singing the same lyrics we all grew up with together. I want to tell you about that part now. Before our interview with Massimo, the Warner Theater was practically vacant, save for ourselves and the people working as part of the staff. When we concluded our interview and stepped out to take our seats, the venue was unrecognizable. It was so full of people, I wasn't sure we were all going to fit. Lines of people at the merch stands or at the bar or to get their seats. It was pretty unbelievable. We took our seats, the lights went down, Jose came on stage, and people were just so happy to sit there for the next 2 hours. The people laughing at the visual gags the accompanying video had, cheering when certain characters show up. They use Amy for the start of Speedway race against Metal Sonic, and it got such a huge cheer. It was awesome.
Very surreal. It's so different when you're in your basement and you're editing the video and you're watching the playback, and I'll get a smile. I'm like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Or I was doing like heroes for What I'm Made Of, and I did this shot where it goes from the end boss and it cuts to like some of the cutscenes midway before going to the final hit, and I was showing flashes of all the teams: Sonic, Team Dark, Team Rose, Team Chaotix, and in my head I'm like, oh man, it would be so cool if the crowd like cheered for this, but I'm not expecting it. And then when it happened and the crowd was cheering, I'm like, oh man, this is like, I need to actually think about this ahead of time. Like, these people are gonna react the way I hope. And it's just a surreal moment. It's like something where it's like you really didn't think it's going to be that way. You're just in your head, like, it's probably just gonna be on visuals. People are just gonna be focusing on the music. You don't expect that, or at least I didn't. And every single time I was just like sinking in my chair, like, oh my gosh. I know one of the coolest parts too was at the LA show. When I was sitting there, I was sitting with my girlfriend, but we also invited Katie next to us. We were just enjoying the classic music section of the symphony. And it was just like so cool. And there was somebody behind us, right behind us, who didn't know who I was or what we did. And they were like, whoever edited this, it's so good. And I remember we were just laughing at that. Best way to describe it is like imposter syndrome. It's like, I can't believe this is real. I can't believe I would have this impact, something that I didn't think would be the importance at first. I thought this was just background stuff, like, oh, people are gonna be focusing on the band, the symphony, all this stuff. It's just the background. I didn't expect that to be the audience retention. I didn't expect that at all.
Act 1 was, I think, standard fare. People cheered when you expected them to cheer, applauded when you expected them to applaud, and laughed where one might expect they'd laugh. I think the further we got into the medleys and the more modern era started showing up was when you hear the occasional gasp of excitement at a song or game someone was happy to see. Something I was taken a bit aback by was Jose Delgado addressing the audience just to check in on us and tease the next song. I appreciate the interaction, but it felt odd because of how short each interaction was, not to mention he didn't address us until like before he played the Believe in Myself It Doesn't Matter medley, which is halfway through Act 1. I will say though that the Frontiers medley got a huge cheer from the crowd, and you love to see it. They took about a 10-minute intermission, and something I didn't know they'd do was that around 10 seconds left on the intermission timer, they started playing the drowning music. That got a huge laugh out of us, with people counting down until Act 2 started.
In the second part of the show, people stand up, like the audience, the fans, and sing along the band, sing songs along the band. They know the lyrics, everything about this. That's great.
And Act 2 was even more fun. You had people standing up, everyone singing along, and the cheering was unlike anything I'd ever heard in person before. There was a funny moment around the time they played Night of the Wind. Remember how the video didn't line up when they were playing the Sonic 2 medley during the rehearsal? Well, it kinda happened again. They started playing Night of the Wind and video of the Perfect Chaos fight was playing, and they had to stop so they could fix the video sync. They made a joke about it, we all laughed, it was a good time, and they went on to perform the song with the correct visuals. I just thought it was really funny that it happened twice at two completely separate points, though the Night of the Wind one made more sense because they had just played Open Your Heart beforehand. Shoutouts to like the 15 Silver fans in the theater that day who cheered when he showed up during his world. That was pretty amusing. People laughed as soon as they saw Ian Jr. It was great. The biggest cheer, no surprise, was for Endless Possibility. Well, not the biggest, but you know, definitely a noticeable increase compared to the other songs played so far. It's especially noticeable when it sounds like literally everybody in the audience is singing along. And if you were wondering what I thought of Casey's performance for the songs I didn't get to see her perform during rehearsal, she killed it, obviously. There's not much else to say other than that she commandeered the room with her vocals. And dude, when people saw that helicopter and knew what was coming, the way people cheered was insane. If I thought people singing along to Endless Possibility was a noticeable increase in fans' excitement, Escape from the City was triple that. I'm not even sure Casey Williams sang it right because I couldn't hear her over the thousands of Sonic fans in the Warner Theater singing along with her. After that, Shota presents the members of the band by name and they all take their bow as they prepare to perform the big finale, Live and Learn. This one is indescribable when it comes to the energy in the room. Like you need to be there to properly get a sense of how excited people were to be in that room that day and experiencing this entire concert. It was just amazing. Casey killed it, Shota killed it, everyone in the band, orchestra, the conductor, everyone just did a fantastic job. Obviously not just during Live and Learn, but throughout the entire concert. It was a very fun day. If I hadn't reached out to MGP Live, I could just say it was a fun night, but it was honestly a fun day all around. I met some amazing people, learned some awesome things, got to just be around such joy, and got to be in the presence of such unbelievable talent. To any one of the people involved with the Sonic Symphony World Tour, if you're watching this, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to make it to this point in the video, but more importantly, if you ever set out to make a change in the world through your music, just know that you did that night. And you do every single time you go up on that stage and perform.
Sonic Symphony is like, it's a celebration of Sonic and for everybody, by everybody. And I want to create something great with everyone. And that's how I want to produce this show.
Of course, it's a business. It's kind of, we want to make the fans happy first.
There's so many people behind the scenes though that all help out in some ways, and it's just it's an amazing thing just to have everyone come together and make something. And the team behind the scenes don't get enough credit. They worked their butt off to make this happen, and watching the videos of all the fans laughing and cheering and having a great time, that makes it all worth it.
I feel very fortunate that I'm able to direct and produce Sonic Symphony, and it's a privilege. And being able to work with my guys and take them on the road with me and just like have the greatest hang, and just after the concert we just go out and just drink, have a good time, and once again, like bring happiness to more people, and it just happened to. I think it was just a great match. The Sonic's music resonated with me and with everybody else, and just what we did seemed to work out okay. And hopefully we can bring it to more people. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
well,
man.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nakama.
Thanks a lot.
For taking the time to do this with us.
Yeah, man. Anytime.
Appreciate that.
Thank
All
you.
right. So I think we can-
From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everybody who was a part of this experience. I want to thank MGP Live for inviting me over to interview Massimo and Shota. I want to thank my contact, who was just amazing and so great during my entire stay. I want to thank everybody I interviewed for this video, taking the time out of your day to answer some of my questions. And to anybody watching who are the primary reason that I do things like this. I know that this is very different from any of the videos that I make, but it just felt like the right thing to do. I wanted to share this with the rest of the community because I think that it's a very important part of Sonic is the music. And to share this experience with those who may not be fortunate enough to be able to attend a concert, I think is very, very important. And so I'm very grateful that this is something that I get to do for you guys and for a living. And, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys. But I will see you guys next time. Until then, stay safe, stay awesome. This is Char I5, signing off.